The Formula, or On Potentiality. 1. This is the philosophical constellation to which Bartleby the scrivener belongs. As a scribe who has stopped writing, Bartleby is the extreme figure of the nothing from which all creation derives, and at the same time he constitutes the most implacable vindication of this nothing as pure absolute potentiality. The scrivener has become the writing tablet. He is now nothing other than his white sheet. It is not surprising, therefore, that he dwells so obstinately in the abyss of potentiality and does not seem to have the slightest intention of leaving it. Our ethical tradition has often sought to avoid the problem of potentiality by reducing it to the terms of will and necessity. Not what you can do, but what you want to do or must do is its dominant theme. This is what the man of the law repeats to Bartleby. When he asks him to go to the post office, "Just step around to the post office, won't you?" And Bartleby opposes him with his usual, "I would prefer not to." The man of the law hastily translates Bartleby's answer into, "You will not?" But Bartleby, with his soft, firm voice, specifies, "I prefer not." "I prefer not," which appears 3 times, is the only variation of Bartleby's usual phrase. And if Bartleby then renounces the conditional, this is only because doing so allows him to eliminate all traces of the verb will, even in its modal use. When the man of the law honestly tries, in his own way, to understand the scrivener, the readings to which he dedicates himself leave no doubts as to the categories he intends to use: Edwards on the will, and Priestley on necessity. But potentiality is not will, and impotentiality is not necessity, despite the salutary impression that the books give him. The categories of the man of the law have no power over Bartleby. To believe that will has power over potentiality, that the passage to actuality is the result of a decision that puts an end to the ambiguity of potentiality, which is always potentiality to do and not to do, this is the perpetual illusion of morality. Medieval theologians distinguish between potentia absoluta, an absolute potentiality by which God can do anything, according to some, even evil, even acting such that the world never existed, or restoring a girl's lost virginity, and potentia ordinata, an ordered potentiality, by which God can do only what is in accord with his will. Will is the principle that makes it possible to order the undifferentiated chaos of potentiality. If it is true that God could have lied, broken his oaths, incarnated himself in a woman or an animal instead of in the sun, he thus did not want to do so, and he could not have wanted to do so, and a potentiality without will is altogether unrealizable and cannot pass into actuality. Bartleby calls into question precisely this supremacy of the will over potentiality. If God, at least de potentia ordinata, is truly capable only of what he wants, Bartleby is capable only without wanting. He is capable only de potentia absoluta, but his potentiality is not, therefore, unrealized. It does not remain unactualized on account of a lack of will. On the contrary, it exceeds will, his own and that of others, at every point. Inverting Karl Valentin's witticism, "I wanted to want it, but I didn't feel able to want it," one could say of Bartleby that he succeeds in being able, and not being able, absolutely, without wanting it. Hence the irreducibility of his "I would prefer not to." It is not that he does not want to copy, or that he does not want to leave the office. He simply would prefer not to. The formula that he so obstinately repeats destroys all possibility of constructing a relation between being able and willing, between potentia absoluta and potentia ordinata. It is the formula of potentiality. 2. Gilles Deleuze has analyzed the particular structure of Bartleby's formula, likening it to expressions that linguists define as agrammatical, such as Cummings' "he danced his did," or "j'en ai un deux pas assez." Deleuze argues that the destructive force of Bartleby's formula consists in its secret agrammaticality. Quote, "The formula disconnects words and things, words and actions, but also speech acts and words. It severs language from all reference, in accordance with Bartleby's absolute vocation to be a man without references, someone who appears suddenly and then disappears, without reference to himself or anything else. Philippe Jaworski, for his part, has observed that Bartleby's formula is neither affirmative nor negative, and that Bartleby neither accepts nor refuses, stepping forward and stepping backward at the same time. As Deleuze suggests, the formula thus opens a zone of indistinction between yes and no, the preferable and the non-preferable, but also, in the context that interests us, between the potential to be, or do, and the potential not to be, or do. The final to that ends Bartleby's phrase has an anaphoric character, for it does not refer directly to a segment of reality, but rather to a preceding term from which it draws its only meaning. But here it is as if this anaphora were absolutized to the point of losing all reference, now turning, so to speak, back toward the phrase itself. An absolute anaphora spinning on itself, no longer referring either to a real object or to an anaphorized term. I would prefer not to. What is the origin of this formula? Critics have cited one of Melville's letters to Hawthorne, in which he praises no over yes as a possible precursor to Bartleby's phrase. For all men who say yes lie, and all men who say no, why, they are in the happy condition of judicious, unencumbered travelers in Europe. They cross the frontiers into eternity with nothing but a carpet-bag, that is to say, the ego. The reference could not be more out of place. Bartleby does not consent, but neither does he simply refuse to do what is asked of him. Nothing is farther from him than the heroic pathos of negation. In the history of Western culture, there is only one formula that hovers so decidedly between affirmation and negation, acceptance and rejection, giving and taking. The formula, which is morphologically and semantically similar to the scrivener's litany, is recorded, among other places, in a text that was familiar to every cultured man of the 19th century, Diogenes Laertius's Lives of Eminent Philosophers. We are referring to the expression ou malon, no more than, the technical term with which the skeptics denoted their most characteristic experience, epoche, suspension. The skeptics, Diogenes writes in his Life of Pyrrho, use this expression neither positively, thetikos, nor negatively, anaretikos, as when they refute an argument by saying, Scylla exists no more than, ou malon, a chimera. The term, however, is nevertheless not to be understood as indicating a genuine comparison. But the skeptics refute even the no more than, for just as providence exists no more than it does not exist, so the no more than is no more than it is not. Sextus Empiricus reaffirms the self-referential status of ou malon just as decisively, even as the proposition, every discourse is false, says that it too, like all propositions, is false, so the formula no more than says that it itself is no more than it is not. And even if this expression appears as an affirmation or a negation, still this is not the sense in which we use it, but rather an indifferent, adiophoros, and illegitimate sense, katakristikos. The way in which the scrivener makes use of his obstinate formula could not be characterized more precisely, but the analogy can also be followed up in another direction. In his Outlines of Pyrrhonism, having commented on the meaning of the expression ou malon, Sextus adds, the most important thing is that, in uttering this expression, the skeptic says the phenomenon and announces the affect without any opinion. Apageliae to pathos adoxastos. Although it is not usually recorded as such, this last expression, pathos apagelian, is also a technical term of the skeptic's lexis. We find it once again, in the same sense, in another passage of Sextus's Outlines. When we say everything is incomprehensible, we do not mean to state that what the dogmatics seek is by nature incomprehensible. We limit ourselves to announcing the passion, or affect, to hotu pathos apagelontos. Agelo and apagelo are verbs that express the function of the agelos, the messenger, who simply carries a message without adding anything, or who performatively announces an event. Polemon apagelian means to declare war. The skeptic does not simply oppose aphasia to phasis, silence to discourse. Rather, he displaces language from the register of the proposition which predicates something of something, legienti kata tinos, to that of the announcement, which predicates nothing of nothing. Maintaining itself in the epoche of the no more than, language is transformed into the angel of the phenomenon, the pure announcement of its passion. As the adverb adoxastos specifies, passion here indicates nothing subjective. Pathos is purified of all doxa, all subjective appearance, and becomes the pure announcement of appearance, the intimation of being without any predicate. In this light, Bartleby's formula shows its full sense. It inscribes whomever utters it in the line of ageloi, messengers. One of these messengers is Kafka's Barnaby, who, we read, was perhaps simply a messenger, one who knew nothing of the content of the letters entrusted to him, one whose gaze, smile, and walk seemed to be those of a messenger, although he himself was not aware of it. As a messenger, Bartleby was sent for some mysterious purpose of an all-wise providence, which it was not for a simple mortal to fathom. But if the formula he repeats hovers so obstinately between acceptance and refusal, negation and position, if it predicates nothing and, in the end, even refutes itself, what is the message he has come to tell us? What does his formula announce? 3. The skeptics understand potentiality possibility, dynamis, as any opposition between sensibles and intelligibles. By virtue of the equivalence found in the opposition between words and things, we thus reach the epoche, the suspension, which is a condition in which we can neither posit nor negate, accept nor refuse. According to this striking text of Sextus, the skeptics viewed suspension not simply as indifference, but as an experience of possibility or potentiality. What shows itself on the threshold between being and non-being, between sensible and intelligible, between word and thing, is not the colourless abyss of the nothing, but the luminous spiral of the possible. To be able is neither to posit nor to negate. But in what way does what is no more than it is not still preserve in itself something like potentiality? Leibniz once expressed the originary potentiality of being in the form of a principle usually defined as the principle of sufficient reason. This principle has the following form: ratio est cur alaquid sit potius quam non sit. There is a reason for which something does rather than does not exist. Insofar as it cannot be reduced either to the pole of being or to the pole of nothing, Bartleby's formula, like the skeptic archetype, calls into question the strongest of all principles, appealing precisely to the potius, the rather that articulates its scansion. Forcibly tearing it from its context, the formula emancipates potentiality, potius from potis, which means more powerful, from both its connection to a reason, ratio, and its subordination to being. Commenting on the principle of sufficient reason, which his teacher Leibniz had left unproven, Christian Wolff explains that our reason is disgusted by the idea of something taking place without a reason. If one takes away this principle, he writes, the true world becomes a fairy tale world in which the will of man takes the place of reasons for what happens. The mundus fabulosus at issue here is that of the absurd fairy tale told by old women, and that, in our vernacular, is called Schlaraffenland, the land of plenty. You would like a cherry, and at your command there appears a cherry tree full of ripe fruit. According to your wish, the fruit flies toward your mouth, and, if you so will it, divides in half in mid-air, letting the pit and the bad parts fall to the ground so that you do not have to spit them out. Pigeons roasted on a spit fall from the sky, and spontaneously enter the mouths of whoever is hungry. What is truly disgusting to the philosopher's eyes, however, is not that will and caprice take the place of reason in the domain of things, but that ratio is thus also extinguished in the domain of will and potentiality. Not only are there now no principles of possibility and no principles of actuality external to man, what is more, not even the will has a principle for its willing, but instead indifferently wills anything. Hence it does not even want what it desires. there is no reason for it to want one thing rather than another. It is not true, therefore, that once the principle of reason is removed, human will takes the place of ratio, transforming the true world into a fable. Precisely the contrary is true, namely, that once ratio is removed, the will is ruined together with it. In the ascetic Schlaraffenland in which Bartleby is at home, there is only a rather fully freed of all ratio, a preference and a potentiality that no longer function to assure the supremacy of being over nothing, but exist without reason in the indifference between being and nothing. The indifference of being and nothing is not, however, an equivalence between two opposite principles. Rather, it is the mode of being of potentiality that is purified of all reason. Leibniz did not allow the possibility to have any autonomous potential to make itself exist, puissance pour se faire exister, which he argued was to be found outside the possible, in God, insofar as he is a necessary being, that is, existentifying. Now, wholly subverted, the Leibnizian principle instead takes on the Bartleby-like form of the following statement. The fact that there is no reason for something to exist rather than not to exist is the existence of something no more than nothing. In the place of the Prince of Denmark's boutade, which reduces every problem to the opposition between to be and not to be, being and non-being, the scrivener's formula suggests a third term that transcends both, the rather, or the no more than. This is the one lesson to which Bartleby always holds. And, as the man of the law seems to intuit at a certain point, the scrivener's trial is the most extreme trial a creature can undergo. For to hold to the nothing, non-being, is certainly difficult, but it is the characteristic experience of the ungrateful guest, nihilism, with whom we are all too familiar today. And to hold simply to being and its necessary positivity is also difficult. But is this not precisely the sense of the complicated Western onto-theological ceremony, whose mortality is in secret solidarity with the guest it would like to drive away? To be capable, in pure potentiality, to bear the no more than, beyond being and nothing, fully experiencing the impotent possibility that exceeds both, this is the trial that Bartleby announces. The green screen that isolates his desk traces the borders of an experimental laboratory in which potentiality, 3 decades before Nietzsche, and in a sense that is altogether different from his, frees itself of the principle of reason. Emancipating itself from being and non-being alike, potentiality thus creates its own ontology.